The core of what Lightning focuses to resolve is scaling, right? And scaling is really the core issue that I think we've seen tackled in a lot of different ways lately. We've seen it tackled through alt layer ones, like Avalanche, Solana. Check out our deep dives on those. Polygon, right? We've seen it tackled through layer twos, Optimism, Arbitrum, ZK VM solutions. Polygon has one. ZK Sync, Scroll, Starknet, right? All about scaling, right? Because the base layer of Bitcoin supports 7 transactions per second.
Welcome to the Decent Crypto Podcast. Today is Thursday, December 1st, and we are live with Bitcoin Month. This is part 2 of our Bitcoin series. Today's Lightning Network. Matt, how are you feeling about this one?
I am so excited to cover the Lightning Network. It's the future that could have been, the future that still could be.
That still could be.
It's really amazing. Lightning Network just tackles so many things that that we've been talking about in the space for the last cycle. But like these are all kind of solved problems. So I guess let's get into it. Why does Lightning Network exist?
Yes, exactly. Why does it exist? So let's go back to the origins, Matt. Our version of the Bible, the Bitcoin white paper. So if you start at the top of the Bitcoin white paper, it's a peer-to-peer electronic cash, right? So let's just start there. Like if you try and mimic the properties of what a cash or what a cash system is and what it does, you don't really have that at the base layer of Bitcoin, right? You don't have the ability to easily transact, to have micro transactions, which you can with cash. You can just exchange pennies. You don't have the privacy of a cash system where we don't have dollars that have a transaction history associated with them, right? Whereas a Bitcoin, transaction or Bitcoin wallet, it has the whole transaction history tied to it. In fact, the Bitcoin blockchain doesn't even store wallets and addresses. It just has transaction outputs. And then you calculate amounts backwards from there, right? So balances, from there. So this cash system doesn't really exist at the base layer of the Bitcoin protocol. So the Lightning Network is kind of an attempt to build that, to scale Bitcoin to all of the things that, like you said, it could be. So what are those things, right? Like, how does it accomplish this? Because you said a lot of these problems are solved, right? So my first question when hearing that is like, well, why isn't Lightning Network just everywhere, right? Like, why aren't we paying for everything in Bitcoin? Why aren't we having one Satoshi microtransactions? One Satoshi is like 1/10 millionth of a Bitcoin, or is it 1 millionth? So if it's solved, right, then like, why doesn't it appear solved, right? And how is Lightning approaching these problems? Let's start there.
Yeah, so really the core of what Lightning focuses to resolve is scaling, right? And scaling is really the core issue that I think we've seen tackled in a lot of different ways lately. We've seen it tackled through alt layer ones, like Avalanche, Solana. Check out our deep dives on those. Polygon, right? We've seen it tackled through layer twos, Optimism, Arbitrum, ZK VM solutions. Polygon has one. ZK Sync, Scroll, Starknet, right? All about scaling, right? Because the base layer of Bitcoin supports 7 transactions per second, right? Whereas like the Visa network supports something like 47,000 transactions per second. And Solana is somewhere around...
in a quick little summary, like, why is it that? Like, why is it 7 transactions per second or that slow? Is it because like all these messages need to be propagated across all the networks and then they need to be sent to this proof of work system, or like what is the complete limiting factor there?
Yeah, it's the decentralized consensus, right? So the things that you said, like every transaction has to be propagated to every node in a decentralized way. And then in order to reach consensus, you have to have proof of work, and then you need slower block time so that consensus can actually be reached for a meaningful amount of time. And And so, Bitcoin blocks happen once every 10 minutes, right? If you want to send Bitcoin, you have to wait like an hour to reach like final settlement, right? Um, and in the real world, if you wait an hour like if you try to buy a cup of coffee with Bitcoin, and you wait an hour, your coffee's going to get cold, right? We've heard this
Yeah,
one before.
this is the thing that people have been bringing up since the dawn of time is you can't pay for a cup of coffee with Bitcoin because it'll take 60 minutes to actually be confirmed on chain. And what is the point, right? Like, what are you going to do? Wait at the counter? Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, you're going to ask people to wait while these transactions settle. So
Man, I went to get a cup of coffee the other day. There were like 8 people in line, one barista, and it's just like, this is going to take a half hour, right? I'm not down for that.
Yeah, this is the use case for Bitcoin is overcrowded cafes where you just have to wait no matter what.
Yeah.
Okay, so then how does Lightning try to address this?
So Lightning uses cryptography to allow people to, and like enforceable on-chain activity to allow people to send and receive transactions in a way that doesn't require every single transaction to get updated on chain.
Okay.
And so that's sort of the key scalability unlock is that not every transaction is broadcast to the Bitcoin blockchain, right?
I see.
So the core of it is something called a payment channel, right?
Okay.
So let's say you and I, we go for a lot of drinks, a lot of food. We're just enjoying the bear market. And let's say we want to we want to open up a tab with each other so that we can settle it up later. Maybe we each put 1 Bitcoin in, right? And then I get a round of drinks and it costs 0.1 Bitcoin. It's a very expensive round of drinks.
This is the most expensive drinks.
We are in New York City.
Yeah, this is true. Dude, that's actually quite nuts. You said 0.1 Bitcoin and I was imagining like $5,000, but it's not $5,000 anymore.
No, it's not. It's like $1,600,
yeah.
$1,700.
Okay, reasonable for New York City. Okay.
We go, one of us gets around to drinks, and the other one wants to send 0.1 Bitcoin to like cover their half of it, let's say, like very expensive drinks. So let's say you get the drinks, you put it on your card to get those sweet rewards points. And I want to send you 0.1 Bitcoin. But we know we're going to do something like this again tomorrow. I'll get the sweet rewards points. Maybe you're going to send me a little bit of Bitcoin to cover that. What we can do is we can open up a channel, which is a little bit like creating a tab. And let's say let's say just to start, maybe we keep it really simple and I put in 1 Bitcoin, right?
Okay.
Since I know you're going to get the first round of drinks, right? As part of opening that channel, we which is like a multi-sig, right? So in order to spend like Bitcoin from that channel, you and I each have to sign a transaction that allows for that, right?
Okay.
And so what we do is we sign something called like a time locked transaction. And that says in 30 days, Matt put 1 Bitcoin in. So in 30 days, you can send Matt 1 Bitcoin out of this channel, right? That's like and we both sign that, right?
Okay.
Okay. And so then like, if you refuse to cooperate or whatever, I know I can always get my 1 Bitcoin out. Okay.
After that period ends.
After 30 days. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I see. I see.
So worst case scenario, like I never get any Bitcoin from you or whatever. I never pay you. Let's say you go totally offline. Then I can always get my 1 Bitcoin out that I put in.
Okay. And this whole process, this whole process that you're describing right now of like going into the channel, kind of like setting up this system, this is the off-chain recording that you described kind of at the beginning of this, right? Where you said the way to scale this network is to take some of these transactions off-chain, the ones that are maybe going to happen between 2 parties over and over, or the ones that are really small amounts, things like that. Like the stuff that you don't necessarily need to broadcast to the Bitcoin blockchain, every time, right? Like you can basically create this kind of channel that takes certain transactions off chain in this sort of way, right?
Yeah. Well, I want to say the opening of the channel, it would get broadcast on chain,
Okay,
so that
yeah.
you know
So
that I'm good
that
for it. You know that my Bitcoin has entered this channel, this payment channel between the two of us.
right. Okay,
But
so
then, mhm.
is that payment channel, the creation of a payment channel, is that just a type of transaction on the Bitcoin blockchain, or like what is that exactly?
Yeah, exactly. It's the creation of a multi-sig address
Mm, mm,
that takes a signature from you and a signature from me in order to spend anything.
I see.
In order to like move those bitcoins out of that multi-sig address. And and then um, and then we sign this other transaction that says 30 days after this thing gets open, we like allow Matt to get one Bitcoin out of this thing, right? As like a fail safe, right? So you sign this transaction, I sign this transaction, so that it's like a valid spend out of the multi-sig address. But we don't broadcast that on chain, right? We hold on to that. Each of us holds onto a copy. And so if I ever, if you just go completely AWOL, I'll be able to broadcast this transaction on chain and get my Bitcoin back. Um,
Do I do the same thing? Like, am
I
I
mean,
entering Bitcoin in this situation as well, or are you the only person entering Bitcoin?
to keep it simple, I just said, why don't we make it a thing where like only I put Bitcoin in? But
Okay, I see.
you could equally do like you put one Bitcoin in, I put one Bitcoin in, and we each sign a transaction that sends one Bitcoin back to you and one Bitcoin back to me,
Okay, got
right?
it.
Maybe that's a better way of thinking of it, right?
Okay, okay. I
Um,
see. So it can be done either way, but in this case, let's just continue with your example.
yeah. So we go for drinks, and then I want to send you zero point 0.1 Bitcoin. I
Mm-hmm.
sign a transaction that says, okay, we have an update to the contract, right? And so this is where like the time lock like thing comes into it. Is like, or not necessarily time lock, but like there's like an ordering here. There's an on-chain enforceable ordering of transactions. So
Mm,
like you could think of it like a nonce almost, right? You and
mm,
I have our first transaction that sends me back my one Bitcoin. But
mm,
then we have another one that's transaction ID 2, right? And this sends me back zero point 0.9 Bitcoin, sends you zero point 0.1 Bitcoin, right?
mm.
And so this way, if I go completely offline, you can broadcast in the network. I get zero point 0.1 Bitcoin out, Matt gets zero point 0.9 Bitcoin out, right?
Mm.
Um, and
So it's
we
basically an
set it.
updated signature, including the next transaction that we just engaged in.
Yeah, and this way, if I start to act maliciously, right? Let's say I broadcast the first transaction
Yeah,
that sends me one Bitcoin, even though
right.
I'm supposed to only get zero point 0.9 now.
Mm-hmm.
You can go to the chain and be like, whoa, 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 that's not valid. This one is the valid one. Look, it has a higher transaction ordering, and look, it's signed by Matt, right?
Mm,
And
mm.
so this is actually what it's meant to be, right?
Okay, I see. And what if yours gets confirmed before I do that, before I contest it or whatever?
There's like a delay period where like
Mm.
people are waiting to see if there's going to be any like later updates to that thing, or
Okay, I
if we're
see.
just going to accept this one as like the valid transaction. Yeah.
Mm. I see, I
Um,
see.
yeah.
Okay.
So,
And so
mhm.
let me just try and summarize for myself and the listeners here so far what's happened, right? So we have created a new multi-sig address where one party or both parties can deposit funds, and we create a this like is built on the idea that like there is some kind of like minimal level of like smart contract functionality in here, right? That says that we can do certain things within this multi-sig, like, transfer funds between the two wallets that are signing, update certain things that are happening, have multiple transactions happen, do the, kind of like verify this on chain afterwards, have this kind of security for both parties. it's kind of built on that premise, right? That was some kind of BIP, Bitcoin Improvement Proposal, that went into place a few years back that allowed for this. That is also not built into the core Bitcoin protocol. But that in essence is what we've done, right? We've created a new multi-sig wallet with some kind of basic smart contract functionality that allows us to operate in this way that's tied to the Bitcoin blockchain, but it doesn't require every single transaction within that multi-sig to then be broadcast to the chain.
Yeah. It only requires the latest one, the settling up settling up transaction, if you will.
Right.
And the settling up transaction has this special functionality, like you were saying, where any prior settling up ones, anything that came like before this one in order, is just gonna fail. Right. As soon as the network sees that like another later settling up transaction has been issued and signed by both parties, they're just going to default to that one as like the final settling up transaction. And so, yeah, you're right. Like all of this requires like some opcodes that weren't built into the like core Bitcoin protocol. But Bitcoin actually has a fair amount of logical capacity. Like it has a fair number of opcodes in it that it doesn't allow for like full like Turing complete like program expression the way that Ethereum does, but it does have some scriptability. So and this is by design, right? Because the idea is the more flexibility you have, the more attack like surface area you have. And so Bitcoiners will argue that like the simpler you can keep it, the less attack surface area you can open up, the stronger your protocol is going to be.
Right.
And so, the Lightning Network required, I think, like one core opcode to get added that made all of this possible.
Okay.
So to summarize, we've opened up a channel by sending some amount of Bitcoin in, right? And then offline, off-chain, like not getting broadcast to the blockchain overall, we are, between the two of us, sending back and forth signatures on transactions that update the cash out transaction, right? That will eventually get broadcast on chain.
Okay, so we just sign those. We don't actually broadcast them until we're ready to close out our tab, basically, so to speak, right? So exactly. It's like we're just signing them, and at any point, either party can send that to the chain and say, like, look, our channel is now complete. We want to settle this back to the chain, sending my Bitcoin back to my original wallet, out of this multi-sig. And the other person has a window to contest that and say, nope, I have a more updated version of what happened inside of this channel. Look at this transaction I'm presenting. It's signed by both parties. So actually, this is the more valid one. Close the channel now. So that's the life cycle of a channel on the Lightning Network.
Yeah. And so where this, I think, becomes like really, really interesting is in its parallels to optimistic rollups, right?
Interesting. Okay.
Because an optimistic rollup is also a batch of like updates to a shared state, right? To a channel, if you will. And it also has a period over which the results can get contested by anyone. On Lightning Network, though, it's done in a fully peer-to-peer, like decentralized way, where like literally this is peer-to-peer. You're my peer, I'm your peer. Either of us can submit like a more recent transaction to settle up at any time, and it's fully trustless, right? Whereas with Optimism or Arbitrum, like Optimism doesn't actually have the capacity to contest this stuff today, but like Arbitrum does. But only Arbitrum like Labs has the capacity to issue one of these transactions.
I see.
That contests the results of like updating the state of the channel.
I see.
Yeah.
So it's really
it is interesting, right?
Yeah.
This is effectively like the ancestor of optimistic rollups.
Okay. So these channels, right? This is useful if I know you, you know me, or like, we're doing a lot of transactions together, back and forth, or, like we have some kind of relationship, right? Where we're just either like a business relationship, personal relationship, whatever. But we just have to be engaging in a lot of activity, right? Transactional activity for this to actually be a useful thing. If I want to send a microtransaction to somebody random, somebody new, just one time, right? Or, I want to pay for something with a, microtransaction. This seems like not that useful. So how does the Lightning Network actually address that part? Right.
Yeah. So what's really cool about the Lightning Network is because all of this is enforceable with like cryptography and the rules of the blockchain. There's no trust involved, right? You can have transactions that go across multiple channels, right? And use that same level of like base cryptography to enforce them. So
Okay.
so let's give an example, right? We have our friend Alice, right? And she wants to send you a transaction. She wants to send you a little bit of Bitcoin, but she doesn't have a channel open with you. She has a channel open with me, right? Well, she needs some kind of like cryptographically enforceable way of knowing that you get paid before she's going to be down to pay me. So maybe I front you her payment, and then I can send you a payment conditional on her sending me a payment, right? And so the way this works is you give Alice a little bit of data, right? And you say this is the result of hashing a secret, right? I'm going to tell that secret to Matt, right? But Matt's not going to tell it to you, right?
Okay.
Because it's in his own best interest not to. As soon as Matt sends you that secret, the whole thing will get finalized. So he's going to wait until you send him the payment. So first I'll send you some Bitcoin, right? And then you send me the secret, right? And then I can confirm that that secret hashes to what you've told us it should hash to.
Okay.
Then I wait for Alice to send me some Bitcoin, and then I give her the secret, right? And so and you can imagine this with like lots and lots of parties, right? And then once she has that secret, she can use it to like finalize the transaction. The idea being that everyone has the same hash algorithms, everyone has access to the same like hash of the data, and they're only going to pass the data once they get paid, right? So this is trustless, right? So I'm only going to send Alice the secret that you sent me after I get paid by her. And that way, so all of these transactions have something like a timeout, right? Where like, if I don't get paid by Alice in 3 days, my payment to you is going to get canceled, right? It's no longer going to be valid. And if I do get paid by Alice within those 3 days, then I'll send her the secret, and then the whole thing can be broadcast in the network if we want it to. So the idea is that like liquidity is a little bit composable here, right? We can, but in a peer-to-peer way.
Okay.
Where I can open a channel with you, I can open a channel with Alice, and look, like maybe I take a little bit of a fee. Maybe Alice wants to send you 0.1 Bitcoin, but I'm going to charge 100 Satoshis because in the meantime, during those 3 days, while I'm waiting to get payment from her, or like for the whole thing to confirm, I have capital locked up, right? I have some Bitcoin that I can't otherwise be spending because it's been earmarked for you to receive. And so in exchange for locking up my Bitcoin for a certain period of time, I should get a little bit of payment. So Alice is going to send me 0.1 Bitcoin and a fee of 100 Satoshis, right? And then I'm going to send you 0.1 Bitcoin, right?
Okay, I see. And so at some point, somebody in the middle has to manage all of this liquidity or have all of this liquidity, right? Between any party that they're connecting, right? Like kind of all across back and forth. So it's like a liquidity like aggregator or pool almost, like kind of like a big hub that if you want to do this kind of, microtransaction across many hops, across many channels or whatever, right? Like going through many of these channels that are like connected through a big party, they're going to have a ton of Bitcoin there to support all of this going back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, you could think of it like a hub and spoke model, right?
Yeah,
Where like maybe I open up a channel with, like, there's a business model here, right? Like,
for sure.
so this
That's
is this is like what I find really interesting is like now we can see the ancestor of DeFi,
yeah,
right?
totally.
Where people are saying, I'm willing to put my Bitcoin in here and I'm willing to have it sent wherever in exchange for a fee of like 10 basis points per day or
hmm
whatever. And so, you could like Michael Saylor could have all of his Bitcoin sitting on chain open, and he could have a website where you can open up a channel with MicroStrategy.
hmm
And
Yeah.
then maybe if I want to pay you, I go via MicroStrategy. Or if you want to pay me, you go via MicroStrategy. And
Mm,
they front the liquidity a little bit or serve as that just like connector node in the network.
right.
But you can also have little micro networks, right? So imagine you, me, all of our friends. You can imagine us as like one little like subgraph where it's like we just want to send Bitcoin around to like one another. We
Mm,
don't really want to have to worry about like opening up channels with whoever. Maybe we all open up a channel with you,
mm,
and then you sort of serve as that like central node
mm.
in the little micrograph in that
Yep.
neighborhood, right?
Right.
And I think in practice that's roughly what the topology of the network looks like today.
hmm
So like in El Salvador, for example, actually like lots of businesses do accept Bitcoin
hmm
to pay for say a cup of coffee.
I mean, they
Um,
have to. I think they're forced to.
yeah, I think like it's forced is like a social consensus, right? Like they're all supposed to, but there are still some holdouts, right?
Mm,
But there's not that many.
mm,
And the idea is when I arrive in El Salvador at the airport, I might open up a channel with a local bank, right,
mm,
or a local like service provider that
hmm
has channels open with a lot of the local businesses in the area. And they are going to be the ones that connect me with my local coffee shop. And all of this is going to happen over the Lightning Network because the fees to get a transaction done on the main Bitcoin blockchain
hmm
are like $1.50, and you have to wait for finality, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you can just hold on to a copy of that signed transaction
Yeah.
and like that the funds are locked up there, like waiting for that tab to get settled, then you know that it might take an hour to reach finality once you broadcast the settling up, the closing of the tab, but you can be pretty well assured that the funds are going to be there
hmm
when it happens.
Yeah.
So so, when you go traveling, like you might open up a channel with a local service provider. When, in day to day, I might have a channel open with my landlord, right? And then also open up a channel with my work, right?
Mm,
And my work can opt to pay my landlord directly, and I just serve as like the middle person, like providing that liquidity.
mm,
Um, the challenge is that it's all peer to peer,
mm.
right? So you need like other third party businesses and service providers that are going to do things like, voluntarily when I open up a channel, I can tell someone, hey, I have this channel. Count me in as like a liquidity provider on your network.
hmm
And like I have the following channels open. So if you see any payments that need to touch them, you can use me as a transaction forwarder in exchange for 10 basis points per day or something.
Mm,
Um, and so this is like super interesting because it's a way to earn yield on your Bitcoin, right?
mm,
In a permissionless, trustless manner,
mm.
right? And all I need to do is pay attention that like when a channel that I have opened like is trying to close, that I'm submitting the best possible transaction for me.
Yeah.
That they're not like trying to settle up something to a prior balance that would be beneficial for them.
Yeah.
Um, and so this to me is really interesting because it's safe DeFi,
Mm.
right? This is very purely earning a little bit of interest in exchange for locking up your liquidity, um, in a like fully permissionless way that doesn't have like smart contract risk.
Yeah. So, okay. I mean, it sounds fantastic, right? It sounds like this is kind of the solution to all Bitcoin scaling. This is going to take us into the promised land. So let's talk about some of the issues now, right? Like, I brought this up at the beginning, but it's like if all these are solved, like why hasn't it picked up? Um, One thing that people always mention is liquidity, specifically inbound liquidity. So the idea that you need to have some funds in your wallet to be able to receive funds. Like inbound liquidity is a pretty mystifying concept in general. So that is one problem. What are some other issues that Lightning Network faces to larger adoption
I mean,
at this
there
point?
is a, like there was a time when Bitcoin was a currency,
Mm,
right? Not just a hard asset to invest in, to buy and hold,
mm,
right? And the Lightning Network vision of the world was that we could use Bitcoin instead,
mm.
right? Not that we could use Bitcoin like we could use it instead of fiat,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
We could use it for actual peer-to-peer like transactions and value transfer.
Yeah.
And it turns out that's not really how people are excited to use Bitcoin, right? We can see this with like the launch of like credit cards that help you spend your crypto. It's
Mm-hmm.
like nobody wants to spend their crypto, right? Like with the exception of a few people, very few people that like maybe all of their income is in crypto and
Mm,
they don't want to bother going back to the fiat world to like spend money or like traveling, right? Like you can see the use case there of like, boy, it would be nice to have one unified currency that I can spend anywhere.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
But generally, like if I buy Bitcoin, it's because I want to own Bitcoin.
Mm,
It's not because I want to spend Bitcoin.
mm,
Um, that is like a really interesting paradigm shift, right? Because in the early days, Bitcoin was a hobby, a toy, right? Then it became a currency for things like the dark web or like Bitcoin pizzas or localbitcoins.org or
mm-hmm.
whatever.
Yeah.
Something to spend, right? And now it's sort of shifted to becoming just an asset, like a hard asset. And generally, people don't want to spend their assets, right? They want to spend their fiat. They want to spend their currencies.
Mm-hmm.
So that to me, I think is actually like a much stronger case for why spending Bitcoin hasn't taken off.
Yeah, that's a very fair reason. I would never spend my Bitcoin. I same thing. Like I would rather get paid in Bitcoin and just keep it.
It's pretty interesting, right? Because this unit of account thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like how many times have you spent your ETH, right? Like I've spent mine on too many dumb things to count, right?
Yeah.
Like NFTs, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of people argue that like having that unit of account or that like currency status
Mm-hmm.
is itself like a value driver.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the answer is kind of,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like yes and no, right? Like, people worry about like, is Bitcoin itself going to suffer issues when like the block rewards get small enough that like it's no longer worth it to mine,
Mm-hmm.
right? Then it's going to have to subsist on just transaction fees.
Yeah.
So some degree of spending is valuable, but it also means that your asset has like a softer asset status
Right.
than like Bitcoin, which is closer to like real estate or gold, where you don't really spend those things.
Yeah, that is a great point because if you look at this as an asset, if you look at this as something like gold, uh, you don't spend your gold. You keep your gold. You pass it down for generations and generations, right? Um, I do think that if this vision of Bitcoin had played out, I guess the idea of Bitcoin being a scalable currency, whichever way you want to scale it, right? Like this kind of goes back to the block size debates as well, right? Which is, do we want to scale Bitcoin by raising the block size, allowing more transactions per block, and sacrificing, the size of the node and hence decentralization of the network for that outcome. And obviously, Bitcoin, kind of the community decided that this is the vision. There were forks, yada, yada, yada. But you kind of see that if it's used as a currency, it loses that monetary premium, which leads to less number go up, as they like to say in the Bitcoin community. So Yeah, it's really interesting. Like if people are paying for stuff with Bitcoin all the time, like does the price just stay low? And it's that kind of, it's a different kind of thing, right? It's just like a tool on the internet to just like pay for, I don't know, random goods. Like it basically just becomes Monero, right? Like that's what Monero is. From what I hear from my distant contacts who know about this stuff, like Monero is now the thing that everybody uses on the dark web,
Mm,
because
interesting.
it's like private at the base layer. So, and the
Yeah.
price of Monero, I mean, I haven't checked it in forever. I have no idea what it's doing, but I don't think it's very high. So, yeah, I mean,
I
the,
mean, you know, Lightning Network also does, though, it does provide more privacy, right? Like, if Alice wants to pay you,
yeah.
she doesn't even need a channel open with you on the base layer,
Mm-hmm.
right? She just needs, like, everybody along the way to accept cryptographic proof that, like, they've been paid.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, everyone along the way needs to have channels open. But, you know, to a degree, like, you know, if it's a 3-person transaction, then every node in the network will know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's like 5, then like only you and the, you know, only the sender and the receiver know the, you know, they don't even necessarily, yeah, they know the full path, right?
Mm.
But anyone in the middle, all they see is the transaction where they get paid and the transaction where they pay. And so it actually does create more privacy than just that base layer of Bitcoin.
Mm.
Um, but, uh, but you know, it's not built in the way that it is in, say, Monero or like Zcash,
Mm.
right?
Okay, so it's not
Um,
fully private, but
no,
it's,
yeah.
yeah, okay, I see. I mean, I'm just trying to think like what other value propositions are there within the Lightning Network that could lead to adoption? Because from an economic standpoint, it does make sense to be a liquidity provider on the Lightning Network if you have the amount of Bitcoin that MicroStrategy does, or you know some of these other big players do. And like MicroStrategy or like Saylor has said that he's shifting away from CEO to just focus on special projects, including Lightning Network focus projects. So um, I don't know. Like
Yeah.
I'm
I
curious
mean,
what they have planned. Like Strike, right? Strike is a company that facilitates these payments where it's like they will take like, you know, credit card, debit card on one side and then make payments through the Lightning Network immediately on the other side. So I don't know. There's stuff going on there. Like maybe it's useful as settlement, like immediate settlement if you want that, but it's I don't know, it's not really immediate if you want it to be settled on chain. So
yeah.
where do you see the
I think,
future for Lightning Network?
well, it comes back to like, do people care about crypto native currencies?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I mean like native like Bitcoin, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you think about the Lightning Network, it's pretty incredible. It's a purely like peer-to-peer um payment network that can touch anyone who's like able to participate, right? It can, you know, you can reach most people that are down for Lightning Network via the Lightning Network.
Mm.
It's not like a tech issue.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's good. So it's good for the user, right? It's cheaper than settling transactions on Bitcoin proper.
Mm-hmm.
It's good for the liquidity provider, and then it's good for one third kind of party, which is like if you have you know, like let's say you and I have a channel open, and you know I don't want to be constantly checking the chain to make sure that you're like not trying to close it maliciously.
Mm-hmm.
I can designate a third party like monitor or watchdog, right? And the watchdog can just be in charge of watching the chain. And then as part of like our, like, you know, we sign this transaction to like settle up in a way that benefits me. I can opt to include a third party to receive a little bit of fees too when that transaction gets broadcast. So now all of a sudden you have a third party who has the economic like interest in making sure that, you know, that they're getting paid, right? And making sure that like the correct version of settling up gets broadcast to the network.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's good for everyone along the way. And it's this system of value transfer and settlement that is purely built out of proof of work,
Mm.
right? Like that's
Mm.
how new Bitcoin enters existence.
Yeah.
So it's just that, like, it's pure, just like electrical money, right? That is based on that evidence of like past work.
Yeah.
And so it's, I like, there's a good phrase I once heard about programming. I think it's from the Mythical Man Month, which is like a great book about software engineering productivity. And like, why is programming hard? Because versus like other forms of engineering, it's because programming is pure thought stuff, right? It's beautiful because it's pure thought stuff. It's just thought, right?
Right.
Bitcoin is just pure work. It's pure proof of work getting pumped into the system where we can use that work as a way of representing value. And to me, that's just an incredibly beautiful thing, right? Where it's just fully actually crypto native, and the security guarantees are strong. But do people care?
Yeah, that's
right?
the thing. Do people care?
Do they
about
care
this
enough
stuff?
to spend their Bitcoin?
Right. I mean, I
don't know.
could see this becoming a thing when Bitcoin becomes less of a speculative tool, when maybe if the price levels off, right? If it's like, if it trades like gold for decades, right? Then it's like, well, it's just a stable store of value and you can move it around permissionlessly as you wish, right? At that point, these kinds of things become much more valuable. But for now, when it's a store of value that you expect to rise in value for decades to come, it just doesn't have the incentive.
Yeah, I'd rather send you dollars if I can than Bitcoin, because the opportunity cost is too high if you're bullish on Bitcoin. Yeah.
Cool tech though.
I mean, pretty incredible, right?
Yeah.
Like we have, like in one tool, we have scalability, we have yield, we have DeFi, and it's all safe. That's the key thing. There's no incremental trust assumptions here, because all of the trust that you need is given to you by the protocol, by the chain, right? As opposed to like most of our scaling solutions today involve some sacrifice of trust or decentralization. Here we have like a genuine grassroots, like peer-to-peer payment system that's scalable and like cryptographically safe.
It's funny to think about, what would Lightning look like with a token, I think it would basically just be like the biggest pump, like,
where does the token come in for providing liquidity, or for like, you'd almost have to pay people to use it, to like spend their Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, basically, I mean, yeah, providing liquidity, right? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the incentive is there as a liquidity provider to do it, right? Because you get paid a little bit of fees for every transaction. It almost feels like what you have to do is incentivize spending of Bitcoin, which is like hard.
It's very hard, yeah. Like, how do you incentivize that? What do you spend it on, right? Because there's no massively built ecosystem like there is in Ethereum where you could spend it on stuff like NFTs or other tokens or other, like, things, not objects that are native to the Bitcoin network, right? You kind of just have to stay there, just send it back and forth. So
yeah,
there's nothing to wash trade either.
Like Lightning Network was proposed when when crypto was for spending. It was for currency, right? It was for sending and receiving. And you can see, in a lot of the other projects that came out around this time, like Stellar, for example, it was all about payments, right?
Yeah.
Dash, Monero, Ripple, all about payments, right?
Super
but now we have other things, right? We have NFTs, we have DeFi, we have all sorts of other stuff, right? And it's just interesting that like, that to me feels like it's fascinating, because with the increase in speculative nature of these assets, you've seen the use case for currency go downhill pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And now we have to have stable
coins. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. How could Lightning work with stablecoins?
Brought to you by the Decent Crypto Podcast. I don't know. That's interesting. Yeah, I have no idea. Like they can't natively be on chain, right? On the Bitcoin blockchain. So
well, the problem with using the Bitcoin blockchain, right, is that with every like proof of work block, like you're sending out some block rewards. And you can't just like print stable coins,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like they need to come from somewhere.
Right.
They need to be backed by something.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end case, like in the end game like vision of Bitcoin, where like there are no more block rewards and fees are just getting like paid out as transaction fees, right? Then you can have then you can have a blockchain where the only asset is stablecoins.
Interesting.
And you can have lightning networks as well, right?
Are you describing Luna?
Mint and burn.
Yeah. No, this is fun. I think Lightning Network has potential maybe 20 years from now, when Bitcoin is trading like this, or if it just Bitcoin just trades at 16K forever, then Lightning just picks
when
up.
When Bitcoin goes to zero, you'll have no problem spending it.
True. We can't scare off the listeners. Some people will actually think it's going to zero after listening to this.
This is not financial advice.
This is absolutely not financial advice.
I don't know. What I love about the Lightning Network is just how peer-to-peer it is, right? With no like middle person. There's no trusted sequencer or prover the way that there are in layer 2s, right? There's no like you're building off of the most secure consensus mechanism in the world, which is Bitcoin, right? You're building off of the hardest the hardest like security that you can get in the crypto space, but you can do it in a scalable peer-to-peer fashion that uses cryptography to guarantee all of this stuff. To me, that's huge, right? It's just and you know, like part of what you wonder is there a way to do it in ETH, right?
Yeah.
But you know, the challenge is that like for ETH, right, you have to bridge every other asset. And here the bridge is like a payment channel, right? Or, you know, you have to lock it up somewhere, right? And the advantage with Bitcoin is you only had to like implement it for that one asset because Bitcoin is all there is on Bitcoin. For ETH, you'd face this question of like, maybe what you can do is have a Lightning Network scalability layer for USDC, right? Where you and I open up a channel and we each put in 100 USDC,
a single asset.
That'd be pretty interesting, wouldn't
it? Isn't that what Polygon is trying to do?
What?
Just you know,
save
scale
that for
USDC.
The Polygon deep dive.
Yeah. Cool.
Polygon is bringing the world to Web3.
Save it for your conferences. No. Cool. Anything else you want to hit, Matt?
No, I mean, I love Lightning Network. A little part of me wishes we lived in the world where Bitcoin did become the default currency for global payments and settlements. Because I think that Lightning provides all of the tooling we need to get there. It's just that like it can't make up for that lack of market demand for spending your Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's true. One day, maybe. When we go to zero. All right. Well, this has been part 2 of Bitcoin Month, the Lightning Network. We'll be back later on this week with a recap of everything that happened. We got more drama. We got more SBF coming. We'll see you all soon. Have a good week, everybody. And until then.
None of this was financial advice, legal advice, investment advice, or any other kind of advice. If you're looking for advice, you are definitely in the wrong place. Until next time, stay decent.